Hello, Wayne County Community College students. Here we are back with viruses. This time we're doing the RNA viruses. Let's learn a little bit about RNA viruses. Here we have the coronaviruses. You can see it's an RNA virus because it has the RNA in it, just like the RNA viruses. Well, for you to remember, the coronaviruses. There is no envelope in the coronavirus, and it's a single-stranded, positive linear structure. What viruses are in the coronaviruses would be polio virus. There's a vaccine for that now, and polio is pretty much very, very small cases of polio are still in existence. Pretty much eradicated, but not 100% like the smallpox virus. But this one is pretty much just some areas where they haven't gotten a vaccine. They may see some occasional uprisings of polio. Remember Jonas Salk and another scientist named Sabin came up with the vaccine for that in the 50s. Echovirus is another coronavirus. It's usually associated with aseptic meningitis. Meningitis, as you know, could be viral or bacterial. So the aseptic part of it just means that it's not bacterial. And usually with an aseptic meningitis, you just have to take care of the symptoms. There's no real medication they give you unless they may provide an antiviral to try to stop the shedding of the virus. But if it's a bacterial meningitis, of course, you get antibiotics, hospitalized, and being hospitalized. But here, generally, just take care of the symptoms. You know, like if you had a fever, of course, you just get the Tylenol, the Motrin, just somebody to take care of it, keep the lights dim, noise at a minimum, etc. So it's aseptic, meaning because it doesn't have bacteria in it. So viral meningitis are known as aseptic. Echovirus is one that causes an aseptic meningitis. Rhinovirus, just think a nose like a rhinoceros, and it'll make you remember that it is the cause of a common cold. Now there are many, like 100 different serotypes of the rhinovirus. So it's really hard to get a vaccine for it because there's so many different serotypes. And this rhinovirus, of course, you remember nose, like a runny nose, like a rhinoceros with the nose, and you'll think about it being cause of the common cold. Coxsackie virus also causes another aseptic meningitis, just like the echovirus, but it also causes a herpangina, and that's a febrile pharyngitis. So you have a sore throat with a fever. That's seen in hand, foot, and mouth disease, oftentimes seen in children. Another thing about Coxsackie is it can attack the heart, and we see that making the heart muscle become inflamed, and that can lead to death. And that's a myocarditis. Okay. The other thing that this big group of coronavirus causes is hepatitis A. We will talk more about all the hepatitis, if that's such a word, or hepatitis, when we get to the miscellaneous information about the viruses. That'll be in the next video. We'll go into some miscellaneous things about viruses. And I'll talk a little more in general, a little more in detail about each of the things I want you to be familiar with viruses. All right, let's look at Calixi virus. No envelope, single-stranded, negative, linear structure of this virus. Hepatitis E is part of this. virus, and Norwalk are part of this virus. So hepatitis E we'll talk about later, like I said, with all the hepatitis. And Norwalk, you probably are familiar with the Norwalk virus because it does indeed cause a lot of problems, gastroenteritis on cruise ships, which a lot of people, if you ever take these cruise ships and end up sick, it's probably a Norwalk virus where you're throwing up, you have diarrhea, etc. Also seen in daycare centers. It just goes from one child to the next, and you'll see a lot of viral gastroenteritis there too. Let's look at Retroviruses. No envelope here. A double-stranded negative linear virus. I'm going to go more into detail about a virus being segmented, and that will let you know what a segmented virus is. All RNA, if a virus is segmented, it will be an RNA virus. Only RNA viruses can be segmented. But as you see, not all RNA viruses are segmented. But here we have retrovirus and rotavirus. These two are segmented viruses from the retrovirus genus, and they can cause some different kinds of problems. One thing I want you to remember about the retrovirus is that it is the only double-stranded RNA virus. So all these are single-stranded. You have to see if they're positive or linear, positive or negative, I mean to say, but they're usually linear. Some are segmented, but this one, the retrovirus, since it is an exception, please know that you are probably going to see that on an exam. It is the only double-stranded RNA virus. Now, retrovirus, of course, this is the genus or the family Retroviruses, but this is retroviruses, and it has another name for the same name as the virus, retrovirus. A retrovirus actually causes a Colorado tick fever. So this also has something to do with coming from an animal base, where we say arthropod or zoonotic base, right? Here is the rotavirus. Rotavirus is the #1 cause of fatal diarrhea in children. And I always remember rotavirus as right out the anus. So rota, right out the anus. So you remember it's just a huge volume of diarrhea. And the children in our country can get IV fluids, but in other countries may not be as fortunate. Let's look at Flaviviruses. Flaviviruses, yes, they have an envelope. They are single-stranded positive linear. They have hepatitis C as a flavivirus, yellow fever, and dengue fever. Now, we don't see yellow fever and dengue here in this country, but in other tropical regions, especially, well, I'll just say in other tropical regions, you can see that. And another thing that flavivirus causes is the St. Louis encephalitis. So some brain swelling there with the encephalitis. An interesting thing too is more recent, in the maybe like 3 years ago actually, we learned about Zika, and I put it here just so that I could, it wasn't in my notes, so I remembered that is a flavivirus, and I put it up here as a note to remind you that Zika, where if you remember maybe about 3-4 years ago, where the babies that were being born, specifically in Central America, it was found there, but it was also found in cases in Florida as well. Well, so we'll say warm areas. Fetuses had microcephaly. They had smaller heads, not full brain development. So a lot of pregnant women were very frightened about this Zika virus. Also, this is coming from mosquitoes, by the way. So that's interesting, coming from mosquitoes. Let's look at Tobaviruses. Tobaviruses, yes, has an envelope, single-stranded positive linear structure. The category of Tobaviruses are rubella, which were known as German measles. Actually, I had that as a child. It can cause congenital heart defects. This Tobavirus can, and you have Eastern and Western equine encephalitis. I know that equine has something to do with horses. That's probably where they isolated it from. But please note that the Tobaviruses can cause congenital heart defects, which means the baby, it will affect the fetus. Then when the baby is born, it may have heart defects due to this Tobavirus. And rubella, for sure, if a pregnant woman gets rubella, that can be very harmful to the fetus. And usually it can cause deafness. But I had this when I was like 9 years old, I think. Retroviruses, yes, an envelope, single-stranded positively linear. This retrovirus, you are familiar with it in that it causes HIV, and then HIV, if not treated or halted, because that's the virus, this is retrovirus that causes this illness called HIV, it can progress to AIDS. And I know oftentimes people say HIV/AIDS, but they're two different diseases. So you can live a full lifetime with HIV, but not so much with AIDS. So it kind of annoys me when they kind of combine those HIV/AIDS. Well, okay, whatever. I want you to know that it has an enzyme in it called reverse transcriptase, similar to the hepatitis B, as in boy, in the DNA viruses. Both of them share this enzyme called reverse transcriptase. In this case, this retrovirus with this reverse transcriptase takes an RNA and switches it to a DNA and starts to make more cells with this DNA machinery. Orthomyxoviruses, this is a category that it has an envelope, single-stranded negative linear. Here is segmented. Now, segmented, we learned about it up here in the reoviruses, but here with this segmentation here is very interesting and causative of influenza virus. This is why influenza can change itself so often each year even. We get our influenza shot or our vaccine annually, but this can have reassortment, change itself, and the segments will rearrange themselves to become a different strain of influenza virus. So orthomyxo, please remember that as carrying this influenza virus. This is the one that the Spanish flu, which we make so much reference to now in trying to understand the coronavirus. The influenza virus from the orthomyxo family or genus is killed. The numbers are staggering. 50 million to 100 million people in 1918, 1919. So they're comparing that to this COVID-19, but really in terms of the number that people die from is no comparison, really. You got to remember in those days, they didn't even have antibiotics, right? But one thing they did know was to wear a mask and to wash their hands. So here's paramyxovirus, the next one. Yes, there's an envelope. It's single-stranded, negative linear, non-segmented, okay? This is a big group that has some pretty good childhood diseases in it that fortunately now we have a vaccine for. And I forgot to mention, since this is measles, mumps, and then I forgot to mention that rubella, even though it's in a different category, they mix these three vaccines together and call them MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. So now if you get your child immunized, they won't get these. I've had measles, I've had mumps, so they're not pleasant, so I would definitely recommend immunization for these. Parainfluenza is another one that causes croup, which is this kind of barking like cough that children usually around the age of 6 and 7 will get. And then RSV, which is really, I shouldn't have written it like that, so that you will know that it's respiratory, where can I put it? It's respiratory, although that's what I call it all the time, that's probably why I put syncytial. Let me see, SYNCTIDAL, syncytial virus. RSV, and I was just, nobody calls it respiratory syncytial virus, everybody refers to it as RSV. So if you use that in your clinical or on the floor, everybody will know what you're talking about. So this is interesting. Babies get this. It's a really nasty, copious amounts of mucus come out of the baby's nose. Baby can't really eat that much, so we put the babies under a tent, a see-through kind of plastic tent, and we put mist of the medication called ribavarin in this mist, and they inhale that, breathe it, and it slowly dissipates the virus. Okay, so that's the treatment. This mist under a tent, and it just the respiratory therapist will come around and apply that and do that. Measles, mumps, I'll just have you remember it. For measles, going back to it, you have some Koplik spots, kind of bluish gray spots on the buccal mucosa, so somewhere in the mouth and around in the tonsils. Koplik, Koplik spots. That is like the gold standard for determining if you have measles. And mumps, you just have this big, like the parotid glands just swell up, so you have these big chipmunk-looking cheeks. Sometimes you can have it on one side, sometimes you can have it on both, so look like that. Rhabdovirus, yes, has an envelope, single-stranded, negative, linear. And that rhabdovirus causes rabies, of which we don't see too much now. But when I was a kid, sometimes dogs, rabid dogs, would be just walking, well, kind of sashaying down the street, foaming at the mouth, and everybody would tell their kids to get in the house, and they would call the Humane Society, and they would come and get that dog. And I mean, I remember seeing that at least twice as a kid, but I've never seen that as an adult. Anyway, rabies, you get bitten by anything that has rabies. Usually now it's a skunk, a raccoon, maybe a squirrel, but maybe not like Detroit squirrels because they're not interested in that. But like, don't make wild animals your pet. That's what I'm saying. Because that bite may lead to rabies. They're nearly 99% fatal. So the best thing, you get bitten, go and wash that wound immediately. Bitten, scratched, any skin breakage of some animal, go wash the wound immediately and get yourself to the hospital to get tested. Fortunately, we have a vaccine for that now, yeah, we have a vaccine for that. So, filovirus, yes, it's an envelope, single-stranded, negative, linear. This is Ebola and Marburg. Ebola was a big deal a few years ago, and my students used to write a lot of papers about Ebola, usually seen on the west coast of Africa, but the Africans have pretty much contained that virus. It was horrendous. I mean, you couldn't even get near anybody who had Ebola without possibly becoming infected. Highly, highly contagious, even from corpses. Like the dead would even still emit that virus. It was a hell of a virus. Bleeding from the eyes, bleeding from the nose, the mouth, the ears even. Any orifice, you just bleed from it. Highly, I would say a highly inflammatory type of virus. You know, so that was really a challenge here. Hemorrhagic fever, and you see actually you're bleeding, you got fever, and it's often fatal. So even doctors that were gloved up, taking care of patients, we aren't sure like if any of the patient's fluid that had Ebola got on you or you breathed in something, it was just highly contagious. They pretty much got a handle on that, and fortunately, from what I've read, antibodies that are in the plasma cells have been able to surrender that virus pretty weak. And now you can, if you had the virus and you survived it, you can get your plasma, have your antibodies to go into people that have been exposed to Ebola. We're trying to do the same thing with COVID, which I'll talk a little bit about when we get to the next 4 RNA viruses, and then that will conclude this. I couldn't put them all on one table, so I'm going to erase this, write the other, I think it's 3 or 4 viruses up there, and that will conclude all of the RNA viruses. So let me erase the board and I'll get back with you. Okay, so I was able to erase the board and put the other 4 remaining RNA viruses that we're interested in. So let's start with the big one here, coronaviruses. It does have an envelope. The RNA structure is single-stranded positive and linear. And as we know, it causes coronavirus. Coronavirus, corona means crown. So the little spikes that come off of the envelope, I guess they are said to resemble crowns. So that's where the name corona comes from. Another cause of the common cold, just like the rhinovirus. Rhinovirus is the most common cause of the common cold. But coronavirus can also cause a common cold. Coronavirus causes severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, that was introduced from Asia a few years ago. And then MERS, MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, that came from the Middle East, from camels, no doubt. Now we've entered into the era of COVID, which is a nouveau, or a new virus from the coronaviruses. And really, we're just beginning to learn more about this type of strain of coronavirus. It is presented in many different ways, and so it's now we're just beginning to understand the many presentations of COVID-19. COVID-19 is named that because it started supposedly in Wuhan, China, about in November 2019, hence 19, COVID-19. All right, so 2019 is the reason that they call it COVID-19. It is a coronavirus, as we know, and as we become more invasive into different animals' territory, or we're eating these different kind of exotic or wildlife animals, we're no doubt going to become more exposed to many other viruses. Bats, pigs, camels, chickens, they have viruses that are okay for them, doesn't bother them, but once humans get in contact with them, it can wreak havoc on our immune system. So that's just to let you know, COVID, as you know, causes illness such as common cold, severe acute respiratory syndrome, Middle East respiratory syndrome. This COVID-19 though affects different people in many different ways. Infected people can have a wide range of symptoms that have been reported, from mild symptoms to severe to death, right? Start off with maybe a cough. Fever used to be the underlying thing, but some people don't even get fever. Shortness of breath. Some have just rashes, like on their toes, for example, which is a kind of odd place to have a rash. But it's not unusual for viruses to cause skin rashes. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. A virus and a rash, that goes hand in hand. The thing about it is, you can lose taste and smell sensation. Lately, coming out of New York, many physicians are noting that younger people, age 20 to 45, are getting this disease, and it's becoming a very rapidly clotting, like it's clotting the blood, and people are in that age range who usually don't get strokes are now having severe strokes and clotting of the blood. One physician noted that he was in the woman's brain taking out one clot, and he could just, right before his very eyes, see another clot form in the arteries in the brain. So I think it's a very inflammatory disease that is affecting our blood supply, and this is why so many people are showing symptoms in many different ways. And lately too, children are becoming even affected by it. Before, young people weren't being seen as, like children weren't being seen as being affected by COVID-19, but now they're coming up with high fevers, lymphadenopathy, where the lymph nodes are swelling, etc., with a disease that looks very similar to a Japanese disease, a disease that came out of Japan known as Kawasaki's disease. So it's a lot of things going on with this COVID-19. I know a lot of people are suspicious about it being formed in a lab, but I would say right now even, I highly doubt that this virus was developed in a lab. I really think it came from animal and jumped to human. And we have to watch the kind of foods we handle, the foods that we eat, and the infiltration into wildlife territory, because it's just going to be another. Viruses are the most abundant thing on Earth, so they're everywhere. This is the next one, RNA-viruses. Yes, envelope, single-stranded negative. Now, these three are circular. Please note we're leaving the linear structure of viruses, going into circular. RNA-virus, you don't see it too much, but it causes a lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus. They call it LCV. So it's a lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus, LCV, from the arenavirus. Bunya virus, yes, it has an envelope, single-stranded negative. This is circular as well. Causes California encephalitis, sand fly, and also Rift Valley fever, Crimea, Congo, hemorrhagic fever. Anytime you see a hemorrhagic fever, high fever, and there's going to be some blood coming from orifices, eye, ears, nose, mouth, and probably other areas as well. Virus is a hemorrhagic fever type of virus, and also causes a pneumonia. This last one is interesting. Virus. Yes, it has an envelope, single-stranded negative circular. It causes hepatitis D, D as in dog. But the only way you could get this hepatitis D from having this virus is that you have to have a hepatitis B as well. So hepatitis B and hepatitis D go hand in hand. So a person that's infected with hepatitis B, as in boy, can indeed develop this other type of hepatitis known as hepatitis D, as in dog. So we have hepatitis A, B, C, D, and E, which I will talk about when we get to the miscellaneous things about viruses and miscellaneous information about those chapters that I asked you to read. So we'll go over that, and I think the chapters were, let me check, I think the chapters were chapters 24 and 25. We'll come back to that, and that will be our last video with the miscellaneous things from chapter 24 and chapter 25. And then that'll be it